and to sell something. So those are described in a job description. It doesn't leave any gray areas. We also have invoice requirements so that people are invoicing us regularly, which is part of our accounting and control system. We don't want people pre-invoicing. We don't want a big lump sum invoice at the end. We have a confidentiality statement that all participants are held to, and we also have guidelines and principles for our support group. So we're going to deep dive into a few of those. And if you need any of these documents, please just email me and we will get those over to you. Or if you're already connected and working with our program director, Melissa Mallett, you can send her an email as well. So our support group confidentiality, we're going through a phase where we're having every participant of the support groups that we fund sign off on this so that we can come back. I had a situation a few years ago at a different organization where someone was excluded from a group because they did not participate in the group rules around confidentiality. When they threatened to sue the organization and myself, we had a signed statement of confidentiality from them that they were going to abide by. So it was a clear, nice paper trail for us from A to Z. So again, we even hold our survivors to this statement of confidentiality. And as we've started new support groups that are maybe considered to be more intimate, more personal sharing going on, like our men's group where they get into dating after brain injury and things like this, the statement of confidentiality has been very important in creating that unique culture and environment that support groups have. So we have our guidelines and principles, and these are a good thing for everyone to understand and to be utilized. There was a movie years ago called Cider House Rules. So I think of this as the Cider House Rules. The people in the group that these pertain to really need to have access to the rules and understand them so that they can be responsible for that group culture and dynamic themselves as well. And a lot of the things you see in here are important from that confidentiality, first person language and attitude, providing a place for participants to find courage and take risks. You're seeing the benefits to people as they heal on their journey, and overall learning some, relearning some rules that will help them in all different areas of their life. We also define what support Brain Injury Alliance will provide. Again, we do not have a position dedicated to being over our support group. So it's really important that we have a clear understanding of who will do what. Refreshments has come up over and over again. We do not provide refreshments, meeting space, and we do not provide personal liability insurance. So we provide the certificate for the meeting space, but not the personal liability insurance for the presenter. And that's another reason why we personally don't work with peer facilitators who might not have that liability insurance, is that it could be a liability for them. We do assist with flyer development, and that helps, hugely helps everything look cohesive, have a similar look and feel, so that when you see something, it has a font, our logo, everything in order, and you know it's from Brain Injury Alliance. And also helps us just really have a cohesive look. We also provide resources, conflict resolution when necessary, so that outside party to kind of help with disputes when they arise. And again, that conflict is something that can really be a culture killer. We had a group in one area of the state that we actually shut down after a large conflict. And participant follow-up when requested. So following up, comes up that someone needs a neuro-ophthalmologist, we're really happy to step in, and that's really working in tandem. And again, support groups are where people get a lot of good information about events, or are reminded about events, or they have a focal point to get a physical flyer for an event, which is helpful for everyone, particularly when you're in a neurocognitive recovery. We also, Brain Injury Alliance also provides the stipend as well. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some attendee feedback. So this is a gentleman that participates in one of our support groups. His name is Billy. He was more than happy to have me share his story, and would love to do it at some point in person. He was so excited to share. This is a picture of him at camp with me. He's trolling me. He found a wig and brought it to camp that mimics how I wear my hair at camp, up in a huge messy bun. So I love it. If you can't laugh while you're getting kind of trolled by your clients, you're not in the right business. So Billy attends a Phoenix support group that's held at a hospital. With this hospital, I can tell you there's good and bad things about having it. We always choose to have support groups at a place that's accessible by bus or light rail in Phoenix. This is held in a hospital. It can be challenging to get to the exact room. So we find that people who have utilized that hospital or have long-time attendees do not have a trouble finding the room. For everyone else, it can be, myself included, it can be a neurocognitive exercise just to get to that room within this huge, huge hospital. So he attends, he finds his way there. He attends that support group at the hospital. This group is one that Brain Injury Alliance funds, and it actually has 3 different facilitators who are all neuropsychologists. The group divides into survivors in one group, and then we subdivide caregivers by those who are caring for a partner or spouse is one group, and then those who are caring for a child or maybe a sibling in a second group. So the caregivers divide into 2 groups because caring for a spouse, different issues are going to come up than perhaps caring for a child. So as that group grew, I would love to do that with all the groups. Unfortunately, all of them aren't big enough or we don't have the resources, but I think that's been a really good thing. So he participates in that group. Billy utilizes both online and in-person groups. He's a 50-year-old male. He had a series of acquired brain injuries starting at 3 years old. His last brain injury was the most serious, and he was isolated for a year post-injury. So even though he had brain injuries previous, he had never sought out. It really didn't disrupt long-term his quality of life. He had never sought out any type of support, and his brain injury had never disrupted his life seriously until this last one. So he's completely isolated for a year. He was referred to the Brain Injury Alliance and the programs through a hospital program partnership. We have a grant where we actually go into neuro rehab and talk with people. The downside is it can be someone who is right out, had brain surgery 12 hours ago. He really feels, what sticks in my mind is he was referred by fellow survivors. Someone at a Mexican restaurant saw his scar from his surgery and said, a fellow survivor, and said, did you have brain surgery? You need to come and do all these fantastic programs and support groups. He's a 30-year-old, or he has a 30-year-old son who participates in his caregiving, and Billy is unmarried. So let's talk about some of his experience. Initially, and these are quotes from him, initially when he was referred to a support group, he went to what we would call an all disability support group. So it's not run by the Brain Injury Alliance, it's not brain injury specific. He found that to be, for him personally, he found it to be frustrating because it wasn't focused on brain injury. He didn't feel understood, and he felt that group was, the peer-led group was dominated by 2 or 3 what we would call super participators, people that share a lot of information. Within that group, a fellow attendee sensed that he was, frustrated, and referred him to the Brain Injury Alliance, where we referred him to a specific brain injury group. He takes a lot of pride. He's been attending that in-person support group at the hospital. He and his fellow attendees take a lot of pride. And also in interviewing him, they take a lot of responsibility for the group culture and dynamic, and they're even protective of it. They had a new facilitator recently. Their facilitator had moved to Utah, and they talked with her about concerns within the group that they were having. His personal barriers to attendance are transportation, driving at night, neurofatigue, and this was interesting too. As you recover and add more things into your day, it can become more complicated to attend. So as he's adding things like, volunteering for a few hours, it can be complicated for him to then go at night and attend. His favorite experience with the group, he was in the hospital for epilepsy monitoring, and all of the survivors stopped by his room after the meeting. He liked that he wasn't forgotten, even though he couldn't attend. His advice to someone starting a support group is listen, let the survivors talk and ask questions. He really felt that the role of the facilitator was kind of like a traffic monitor, and he really felt that someone who could really keep the conversation going and make sure everyone was participating and comfortable. He valued that much more than someone that had what we would call technical experience. Billy also utilizes online support groups. So his peers in the in-person support groups introduced him to Amy's Tribe. He likes the constant flow of people, caregivers and professionals available online. And he likes that there are people from all over the world participating. So he gets to hear about survivors from Canada, New Zealand. But the flip side of that is it can be difficult when there is someone that's isolated and has a serious need and they don't have maybe things that are available in a large urban center like Phoenix. He feels that in-person support groups, it's easier to be more positive. There can be more negativity online, and he thought that was kind of because there was maybe more people with a serious need that were dropping in for help. He noticed lots of talk of suicide and a lot more serious problems online, and he really relishes his online participation and tries to be a very uplifting and positive person on that. Let's talk about our 2019 support group misses. So we scaled up and added a few new support groups. We get people asking us to add new support groups all the time. One thing that we took on was a concussion discussion group. Right before National Concussion Day in September, we've done a series of concussion information sessions leading up to a concussion breakfast, and then rolling into with community trainings and to really raise awareness. And then we delved into starting in December with a concussion discussion group. We defined this for young professionals, and we put it out a limited amount of time, December through April, and branded it as a pilot. So we started working with ASU Greek Life. We had a young lady who had a concussion, Stephanie, and we paired her with a neuropsychologist, Dr. Wilder, to co-lead the group, and they selected the topics. They did a lot of different things. What we really found was that it was tough to get people in active concussion recovery that were most interested. It was tough to get them out at night because they were in active recovery. They were starting to reintegrate into school and the community, and it was tough to then go to a 2-hour support group. And then once they were recovered, they were uninterested in the support group. We also had one of our other misses, and this is it's a mystifying miss, is the brain injury and PTSD. One of our social worker is very networked in the veterans community and has worked for years. We partnered with another large nonprofit, one of the largest nonprofits in Arizona, an independent living center, and produced a brain injury and PTSD veteran support group. One of the requests we continually got was to have a support group of this nature where veterans and caregivers could come together. We did not get that feedback until after we had already launched it. So it seemed to be those that maybe could take advantage of it needed someone to come and be a part of it with them. So we eventually shut that down and did not have a lot of participation. The concussion discussion group had, I think, 2 attendees pretty normally, and we advertised the heck out of that. They got tons of referrals to the concussion group from our TBI clinic in Phoenix and multiple different concussion and TBI providers were referring to that and really believed in it and wanted people to participate. It just didn't work. Some of our hits for support groups, we took some feedback from a Tucson-based support group that some of the members were coming from the northwest area of Tucson. Tucson is a very spread out town. You can be driving for an hour through it. For a town of its size, it's incredibly spread out. And so we were getting feedback that during the time of the night we were having the support group, it was taking people 45 minutes to drive to it. So we started with a home care assistant providing the location. We started a Northwest Tucson brain injury group. So that's something where we identified a few people from a healthy Central Tucson group that were probably at risk for dropping out because of the arduousness of the travel, or they weren't attending regularly, or the caregiver wasn't coming because they weren't getting out of work in time. And we started in a geographic area in all brain injuries, caregiver and survivor support groups. So it's like a smaller version of a culture that was already successful. Our second one is a Think Ahead Family Brain Injury Support Group. So this is kind of the remnants of a federal program that we had that had been run for years in Arizona. The federal funding ended, and so we've been trying to keep this going. This relies on this support groups for families. So families come in and hear different topics. These are families with kids in grades K through 12 who have been identified as a brain injury survivor. The kiddos have. The parents come in and listen to different topics, and then the kiddos go, and we have a peer group that they work with separately, and then they come together at the end of the night and talk about what each group learned. So that one's continuing on, and then we have a really good success with a men's only discussion group, Life After Brain Injury. So it's 18 plus male survivors of brain injury, and for that we paired two survivors together, actually. Steve Norton is a real staple in Phoenix. He is a stroke survivor. He's a peer advocate in the all disabilities sector. So he's someone that works professionally. And we paired him with a survivor, Jim Ledgewood, who had a gunshot wound to the head about 10 years ago in Glendale. So Jim is very active in supporting the Brain Injury Alliance through different endeavors so that there are resources. And he became very entrenched and interested in our programs through that. So it's been extremely successful. I sat down for a little bit with Steve and talked to him about why do we think this is successful, particularly because we didn't even give this the amount of marketing and process stuff that Concussion Discussion Group had, and we have a good solid group already. I think it just started in March, and they have a good solid group already. We committed to, again, the 6-month trial. I don't know if I would do that again. We did it to create urgency, so we didn't have people that looked at the Brain Cave and said, well, I want to come, but I'll, and just kind of keep putting it off and go next month and next month. We really wanted people to have a sense of urgency. The downside is now that it's worked, I have to go back and change all of the materials for it. We paired, again, that peer facilitator, really hyped the been there, done that. And we, again, really define it as 18 plus men only. We don't have at this time a lot of programs for those under 18. We held it at a coffee shop that is not open in the evening, and it just happens to be convenient for the owner who has a son who has a brain injury. He has an adult son. And we did that to reinforce the casual environment. So it's not in a hospital, it's not in a rehab facility. It's in this casual coffee shop. They get to have coffee and some sandwiches. And we, kind of from the attendees, we pulled in those who are not going to other support groups. So somehow this has successfully found those people that really, truly needed it and were not networked in the support group already. So some thoughts from Steve, who's one of the co-facilitators. When I asked him, like, why do you think this is successful? He said the facilitators are involved in the community, and he shares it. He shares the heck out of it with his networks. So it's not like with a concussion discussion group where it was a doctor, your concussion doctor, your neurologist handing you this paper. It's really shared peer-to-peer organically. Not that one is better than the other, but this is clearly working. He also knows from the feedback that the guys have attended, they were looking for this. There was a defined need in the community where there were things that they wanted to talk about, but not in a group, all brain injuries, mixed gender environment. Asking the attendees to bring a friend that next week. Again, those peer connections, just like the peer connections that pulled Billy in to his first support group experience. And the facilitators personally inviting people they know. So they really, they felt that was part of the success. Facebook posts, we did, Steve was really thankful for the marketing. We did Facebook posts, a lot of social media on it. We did full page ads in our newsletter. He really feels that that kept the group in the forefront of people's minds. And he also really felt the entire Brain Injury Alliance staff, so all of our resource facilitation staff and volunteers, really truly believed in the project. And his last thoughts were market, market, market. So if you can tell, I'm a little late sending out my e-blast reminder on that. So that was probably a reminder for me too. So just some thoughts on the things that we've learned from startups, and we're still ongoing. We have a Spanish language support group that we are probably on a 6-month trajectory to start up. We had a clinician come to us and say that she would like to refer people to it. She helped me identify someone with the technical ability in the community that was able to do it for time and for, again, the small stipend. The facilitators are not doing this to get rich. They get a very small stipend. When we have people sometimes who are interested in being a facilitator, they think they're going to get paid for the entire amount of time that you would put into it, answering questions in between sessions, preparing speakers. It's the people who are doing it in a way to give back. So helping me identify someone that really that motivates them is also important when someone comes to you and wants to partner. For her specific group, we also need funding to be able to have the resources to it, since it is an additional one. So we're doing a tamale sale. We're going to do a Christmas in July tamale sale. So the person who's partnering with us on developing this is also committed to having a way to sustain it if it is successful, because every little piece of it, from flyers and everything used to add to it, adds up. So my thoughts on startup, as we're still going through them. Be okay with failure. Just like with the concussion group, you have to understand that you might have misread the community, or there might be something that you don't know. You might build it and they might not come. So for me, for the concussion group, it was really important to have a timeline for stopping the utilization of resources and pivoting to something else, so that there's not these flyers laying all over hospitals and stuff that have that make it appear as the group is still going. So having that defined timeline was important to me, because those social workers and things in the hospital are amazing at their job. They'll get those flyers and keep them on file. You really don't want to be referring someone who needs help to a defunct support group. You and your partners have to commit to flexibility with the concussion group. The medical teams loved it, but we at a certain point had to pivot to maybe a different model of quarterly education, or something that was sustainable. So again, going slow, there's no fire. Volley maybe ideas back to people sometime. If someone came and had a support group idea, but it was maybe more relevant for them to have a club at school, don't be afraid to volley that back to them. You can test your theories at conferences or town halls. We had been kind of playing with doing something around families who had an individual that had brain injury through opioid overdose. We did a town hall and found that the overwhelming majority of people who came out were people that were dealing with chronic pain and were worried about too many changes in how pain medication is administered. We weren't getting the family. So we were able to test our theory of who would be interested in coming out and talking through a town hall. And really define for people if you use peer-led groups and how you use them, have your practices and standards. Trends. I will tell you a trend that we've seen is utilizing discussion groups where there's defined topics in different areas versus support groups. I think it's really helped us attract people and felt less support groupish for the men's group. And then also I'll just mention a little bit about online support groups. It's something that we have put a lot of thought to in the office. Like if you refer someone to an online support group because it's approved at one point and you understand who the moderators are, there can be a lot of changes within online support groups. And this is how Mayo Clinic breaks it down, some of the benefits and some of the risks. People can use that online environment to prey on people, promote products, commit fraud, particularly when you're dealing with clients or peers who may have different levels of cognitive impairment. Participation online may result in isolation further from your in real life friends or family. You might become very beholden to an online community. Anonymity can lead to inappropriate or disrespectful comments or behaviors. And again, these are for general support groups. And then when you take into account there might be cognitive impairment while the brain is healing, you can see there are clear supports and risks for online support groups. So that is everything I have. Again, if you'd like anything, please feel free to email me. This is my email, and I'd love to turn it over to the group chat session. If anybody has anything they'd like to add, their positives or their questions, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I don't see any questions typed in just yet. If anyone has a question, go ahead and type it in. I'll give you a minute here. I'm just kind of scanning people here. If you have a question, I can't see everybody. Maybe wave your hand and let me know you're typing one in. I don't know. Oh, okay. So we have a question, Carrie. Do you set the guidelines or does the group come up with it?
So for the guidelines that we showed in the beginning, we absolutely come up with them. The group can add additional, but that's what we require through our state contract.
Okay, and then we have another question. Do you have any recommendations for marketing an existing support group with limited funding?
Yeah, so from our experience, the best, again, was the things that Steve said, where it was the peers, it was the bring a friend. You know, it was really within the disability networks that they moved, and Steve is very well networked because that's not only his passion, but his job. I don't know. It seems like it's that organic where it happens. It's the word of mouth. It's the people bringing people where they come back consistently that matters more than with the concussion discussion group. I think we passed out 5,000 flyers in a month, and it didn't seem to make a difference.
Okay, let's see. Okay, we have two more. What do you see as the difference, advantages, disadvantages to a professional-led versus peer-led group?
So from, you know, and there might be someone that has more experience in the peer-led group. I think it's for brain injury. I don't know, because I don't have a lot of experience with the peer-led. That's hard for me to answer. The clear disadvantages I can see are liability. So does the peer-led person, are they at a point where they can have their own personal liability? Do they have a lot of experience and interest in the subject? Sometimes with, just like with concussion, with brain injury, if you are at a level where you can handle the neurofatigue of doing, you know, something in the evening, and you can handle all that, you're recovered enough that you're not interested in it and you have other interests. So I don't know, it's finding someone with just that right fit, like we did with Steve, that's able to operate at a higher level. Peer can be very organic. You're getting information from someone who's been there, done that. Again, and it's a model that's used throughout the disability community. Sometimes it just looks a little bit different for brain injury survivors. But I would be worried about the liability, someone that would be able to handle you know, a lot of different things, like really making sure that a lot of complaints I get that the professional facilitators have to handle are people giving medical advice, people being very concrete in their thinking that something worked for them. So this is what everyone has to do. Like everyone should do yoga, which we know from our referrals, that's not a good idea to have a blanket, because brain injury is so highly individualized on like maybe some other things like spinal cord.
Okay, let's see, another two. I've been wanting to start an online support group, but wondered if there's a way to have participants be referred by a professional to keep it from being infiltrated by people that may want to take advantage.
Sure, I think that's a hard one, because I think that's a great question. And because there's areas where people are so isolated, or we talked about Billy's barriers where, you know, support groups are available 24/7, not just at 7 o'clock on the third Wednesday. There are clear benefits to it. I don't know how to think about that, because people can present So you'd want to almost like a vetting where people are vetted and it would be a small group. That's really interesting. So you would know who everybody is before they go in there. That's a really interesting concept, and I would work one-on-one with a provider for that. That's actually a really good, me personally, not professionally, I think that's a really interesting and intriguing concept. So you'd have to do some vetting and know people in person, and they'd all be from a specific area. Yeah, I'd be interested in how that plays out.
Okay, and that person said thank you. And then we have another question. We are a very rural state. Any advice for finding areas where there is a need for a new group? It is difficult to find and connect with people in smaller communities.
Yeah, we run into that a lot in Arizona. So Arizona is, a lot of the population is in Phoenix, Maricopa County, Tucson, and then the rest is really, even in the kind of the bedroom communities around Phoenix, they are like a rural community as far as resources. One thing so two things that we have had problems with in trying to start in rural communities. One, everybody knows everybody. So everybody, it can really hinder sharing. Two, there's not a big population to draw on where people have had that shared experience, which is really what helps with support groups. And then three, we have trouble when we support them because there's nobody to refer to. You're really drawing people again into that Phoenix center or the urban center for support. So I don't know, that's something to really think about, if there's ways we can be using technology through like WebEx or something, just like they do telemed to get into rural areas. How can we be using technology to help connect people so caregivers don't burn out, so survivors get the information they need on their journey? I think there's a lot of room to explore that, but I don't have a silver bullet.
Okay, and I have another one. How much funding is available for BIA Arizona? Where does it come? Is it ongoing? And are you comfortable sharing your slides? I can give an answer to the last question, which is we will have a link for this webinar that we'll send out after the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. So funding, every state handles brain injury so individually. We have a state contract, and when I say the state pays us for support groups, it's about $200 a month, and half of that goes to the facilitator. So it's not, it's a limited funding source. We are a small nonprofit, and you see that a lot in the brain injury community. We are a $500,000 nonprofit, and all that, all that stuff is available online. So I'm not giving any trade secrets, but yeah, we are about a $500,000 budget. 70% of that comes from the state. The rest is corporate sponsors, grants, and donors. So when we talked about the Spanish-speaking support group, I'd love to just wrap that into the budget and say this is something, morally we should be providing and absolutely we should be doing, but there's only so much room in a budget, and so that's where you have to really draw in people that want to support your group and help out. So that's why we're doing the tamale fundraiser in July, to be able to do extra things.
Let's see. Oh, and Russell said thank you. Okay, a little more on the rural question. We have access to technology for telemedicine, as you mentioned. Some have mentioned trying to add it to our existing support group. I feel there might be issues there.
Issues around, were there any issues? I wonder if Kristen was thinking of specifically, it could be people recording. That's interesting. I think there's a lot of room to look at that, but I don't know how to frame all that right now. Yeah, people recording is one that I can think of.
Sure.
So it'd be really nice to be able to assist caregivers and survivors. Caregivers hold up our healthcare system as we know it with their unpaid caregiving hours.
Follow-up question, have you added video to any existing groups?
We haven't. No, I think that's really interesting though.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, okay, here's another one. Are most facilitators neuropsychs? Do you have any neuro case managers, neurosurgeons, etc.?
So we don't have particular, we see our our professionals, what we call them neuro professionals, run the gamut. A lot of physical therapists, occupational therapists, a social worker, really run the gamut. We don't have any, I don't think we have any case managers to those that we fund at this time, but that would be really interesting. So like I said, it has to be someone that kind of lines up where geographically they can physically get to the location where the meeting is held. They have to want to do it as a part of giving back because it's a lot of coordination, not a lot of stipend.
Do we have any other questions?
I have one. I can read it. Can you read it?
How
can you classify?
I don't see it.
Oh, is that the typical agenda? So for the support groups, we really let the facilitator do that. For the new ones that we started that are branded as concussion groups, they start out with a topic of the night. And I think there's good and bad things for that. When you look at, typically what the Mayo Clinic technically says is there's less room for sharing and for just those one-off and someone to come in and say and process something that happened that week. But then there's more time. And then there's also a couple studies out too, when you talk about agendas, having a structured agenda, particularly if people who have been in traumatic situations, can be better, because one of the ways you bond in support groups is by telling your story. So if you're telling your story that involves trauma over and over and over again, that can be something that is not good for your mental hygiene, just to anecdotally say that. But yeah, I think so. We really leave it up to the individual support group because those cultures are so individual. With the discussion group, we try to have a framed conversation. How much they stick to that, it really depends on the individual meeting. And I think there's good and bad arguments for both.
I think, Tom, you may have sent that question directly to Carrie. So let's make sure we send them in the group chat so that everyone knows what the question was, because I don't think anyone else, I couldn't see it, so I couldn't ask it out loud.
I put it in the chat and sent it. Okay, the question is how can you classify yourself as a survivor of a brain injury?
Okay.
We might be a survivor. Well, I'm not done. You can be a survivor of the flu. You can be a survivor of a broken leg. But I daily survive with TBI. It is always with me. And to say I survived it is a lie. I am a survivor every moment of every day. It's a battle. And when you give people this feeling of them being a survivor, well, they might be for 1 second. What about next second? What about next week? Surviving is a battle that we need to understand and accept. Therefore, our battles are easier to negotiate, knowing that it isn't over. It never will be over.
Good. I think that's really good. Thank you for clarifying that. And someone just bugged in it from New Mexico and said they say person living with brain injury. And when I talked about Alzheimer's, we referred to we didn't ever say clients. We said person living with dementia. So maybe I shortened some stuff today just for the, just for clarification and classification. And again, we know that there's all different types of brain injuries. We work with people that self-identify as well. So they self-identify as having brain injury. But I think that's a hugely, hugely important point. And thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Let's see, there are two others. How are the neuroprofessionals paid? Well, there's 3 questions here from one person. How are the neuroprofessionals paid? Do they conduct their support groups in hospitals? And is their population mainly recently brain injured?
Sure, that's a good question. And someone just buzzed in. I don't know if I could be the only one that says it or saw it, but they say that always say survivors and not victims. And I think that's really important as well. survivors' resiliency. So maybe there's some moving along, because we used to say victims. I think that's hugely important too in those that have survived sexual assault too as well. You're a survivor, not a victim. So thank you for that. So the question was, how are our professionals paid? So there's a professional, with that job description, there is invoice requirements, when to invoice, how much you can invoice. So they invoice us just like any contractor. And again, they're only, for our purposes, they're making a $75 a month stipend. They're not compensated for all the time they put into it. So they're truly our partners in making it a better world for life after brain injury. Did I answer all? Was there anything else in that question? Are they always held at hospitals? No. So part of the facilitator job description is they find a place in the community that is amenable. So it can be a rehab center, a community center. Libraries usually are off limits because libraries don't allow you to have a room usually if the facilitator is paid. It has to be a volunteer. So we really find a mutually beneficial place in the community, like the Northwest Tucson group, where home care assistants donated the space, and it's something that their clients can use. And was there any part of that question I didn't get to?
Is their population mainly recently brain injured?
I would say no, absolutely not. I would say most people are 1 to 20 years out. So some people, it is a way to have a social, it's part of their social hygiene and their social routine is to check in with people and guide new people. It's kind of how they give back in their life after brain injury.
Okay. Let's see. We have another one here. What is the typical frequency? Once a week, once a month?
For us, it's once a month, and we've heard again and again that people would like twice a week, because if you miss a meeting, you're going to go 8 weeks without seeing people. We're fairly lucky in Phoenix. We've had a socialization group that started, and it's a group of families that manage socialization activities for those 18 plus. So we have people that fit into that, where they want to go to the museum. It's usually typically people that have a brain injury serious enough where they're not currently working. So we're fairly lucky that we have a lot of other opportunities in our urban center. Now, trying to replicate that in other areas, that's the $1 million question.
Yeah. Let's see, there are two more, and I guess we have a couple of minutes, so we'll maybe answer these two and see where we are. How do you work with cultural issues? So maybe cultural differences is what they're asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say check back because we're just at, we're just at the beginning where we're working with a Spanish-speaking group. We're reaching out to some of what would be considered the gay, lesbian, bi, the GLBTQ groups to do a GLBTQ specific. So I don't know if you mean how do us as a staff work with diversity, or how do you manage diversity within groups? Within the group, it would be on the group facilitator to create a good diverse experience for everyone. But as far as us going into different parts of the community, stay tuned on that, because I think we're just expanding, and you just always want to be mindful and have someone who can work within the appropriate culture. Like when we did not expand and do a veterans only support group until we had a staff person that had that military cultural competency and was able to meet that programmatic need.
Can I just, this is Maria. I just want to clarify, like, if you have a Native American community, a Spanish speaking community, I'm not just talking about, it's like Arizona is very diverse. So how do you integrate those people in to, which is normally a standard of, I don't know, I don't even know how to say it, but as a Native American person, I feel like my culture is important to me, and I would like to know how to be integrated into a support group. How someone who is an individual would integrate into an existing support group. We would just again want to create a respectful and diverse environment that honored everyone's shared experience,
going into, again, we're learning a lot and being very mindful of when we go in to create a specific group for a culture. Like, we have bilingual staff that are Spanish speaking and could help facilitate our Spanish speaking group. We were told by the population that's not acceptable. They want someone who is a Latino to run the group. So I think, is that what that's really as much as I have at this time, again, because we're just kind of starting this. We would work with Indian Health Services, make sure that we have appropriate materials. And again, just kind of, I think it's a learn as you go, and be open to learning and being flexible and adaptable to what those, you know, the feedback you get and what people need.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right track. It's just, I think it would be nice to have a Native American share, but I think it's the issue would be more, is the staff being trained to be sensitive to cultural needs and ethnic and, you know, et cetera.
Sure. So we have primarily our staff is resource facilitation. So they're answering questions in the office. We just do a small amount of support groups. So those staff have undergone like a GLBTQ cultural competency, different cultural competencies, and it's always something you can, you know, do more of and learn more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see, we had a thank you from somebody else, I think, for that question. Thank you for sharing on behalf of Indigenous folks. Let's see, and back to a question that was almost rolling off the screen. Do you recommend that all members of the group sign the confidentiality agreement statement?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that was kind of like the Cider House rules, is that even, you know, that it's absolutely critical. And we found it as we break off and form smaller, maybe more intimate groups that get to the heart of issues, it is the most, you know, when you're sharing things about your fears of dating after brain injury and different things, that confidentiality is key, that you really trust. And it goes into the group culture too.
Okay.
But yeah, everyone is beholden to that. And from a legal standpoint, years ago at a different organization, it helped me as well to have someone had signed that. It was pretty cut and dry that those were the group expectations to participate.
And along the same lines, one last question. This is going to have to be it because we're running over a tad bit. In your confidentiality agreement, do you bring out the exceptions, share with others if someone is being abused, etc., the HIPAA exceptions?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And we have a confidentiality agreement I can share, and you might have a better one. Please share it with me if you do. But even Billy, when I interviewed Billy, he knew the 3 times that the group breaks confidentiality, and that is if, you know, someone is going to hurt themselves. And so he knew that there were specific, you know, if there's a valid suicide threat, he knew that there were times to break confidentiality. And so that was pretty cool in talking with him.
Okay.
If someone's going to hurt themselves or hurt others, yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you. I have one idea because we had so many questions, and I think we addressed all of them. But Carrie, if anyone has questions after the fact, would you be willing to answer them via email?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of them I can loop our program director in too as well. So either myself or she can answer. And I really appreciate. And if somebody has a better idea or loves what they're doing, please share it, and we'll make sure it gets in the next presentation we do. Okay,
so everybody has my email address. I'm Monica. Just send them my way, and then I'll make sure they get to Carrie. Also, I will be sending a link out in the next couple of days of this webinar, so you can watch it again, or people who weren't able to attend, you can send it to them. Let's see. And I believe that's it. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. We had great attendance. Carrie, thank you so much for everything. I think we had something, no? Okay, I think we're finished. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good day. Carrie, thanks again.
That went very well.
I think it did.
Yeah.
Wait. Hey, Don.